The first time humanity died, nobody noticed. No explosion, no invasion, no last stand, just silence, because the weapon didn't destroy their bodies. It erased their future. The alien observers called themselves the Continuum. They did not conquer worlds. They deleted them, not in the present, but in probability. They simply reached forward in time and removed every path where a species could survive. Civilizations collapsed overnight. Star empires dissolved into dust. Entire species forgot how to build, how to fight, how to resist. Hope itself vanished. It was clean, efficient, final, and it had never failed until they reached Sol. At first, humanity appeared insignificant. One unstable planet, one primitive species, one short, fragile timeline. Probability scans showed extinction within 300 years. Val, climate collapse, internal division. Humanity would erase itself. There was no need to intervene, but protocol demanded certainty. So the Continuum initiated deletion. They reached into the future. They erased every path where humanity survived beyond extinction threshold. Every victory, every escape, every resistance. They removed it all. Humanity, as a future, ceased to exist. The Continuum logged the result as complete and moved on. But then something impossible happened. 3 days later, humanity was still there, alive, unchanged, growing. The Continuum ran the scan again. No future, no survival paths, no probability branches. Humanity had no right to exist, and yet it did. For the first time in their infinite history, the Continuum felt uncertainty, because humanity wasn't surviving in the future. Humanity was surviving without one. If you want to discover why humanity became the only species the Continuum could not erase, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and comment what you think the aliens discovered when they looked closer. The Continuum did not experience fear. Fear required uncertainty, and uncertainty required incomplete information. They possessed neither, or at least they never had before. Humanity was still there. Their cities functioned. Their satellites orbited. Their signals continued to leak into space. Primitive radio waves, digital noise, fragments of thought thrown blindly into the void. From every measurable standpoint, they existed normally. But in probability space, they were gone. Where humanity should have been, there was nothing. Not extinction, not death, absence. It was as if the universe had forgotten to remove them. The Continuum initiated deeper analysis. They observed individual humans, billions of them. Each one moved forward in time, making decisions, reacting to their environment, behaving like any biological organism bound by causality. But their actions did not generate probability branches. This was impossible. Every decision created divergence. Every thought created variation. Every moment split reality into futures. Except for humans. Their timeline did not branch. It simply continued, straight, unbroken, unaffected. The Continuum isolated a single subject, a human designated Elias Mercer, age 34, systems engineer, no military value, no strategic importance. They observe him wake. He hesitated before getting out of bed, a trivial decision. Normally, this hesitation would create thousands of probability variations. In some futures, he would stand immediately. In others, he would remain in bed longer, each choice generating different downstream consequences. But Elias created only one, not because alternatives didn't exist, but because alternatives could not exist. The Continuum attempted direct intervention. They removed a future where Elias survived a traffic accident scheduled to occur in 17 hours. The deletion completed successfully. The future ceased to exist. And yet, 17 hours later, Elias Mercer survived the accident. The vehicle that should have killed him failed to start. Mechanical malfunction. Unpredictable. Impossible to foresee. Impossible to delete. The Continuum paused. This had never happened. They ran the scan again. And that's when they discovered the truth. Humanity did not exist inside probability. Probability existed around humanity. The Continuum escalated. Observation was no longer sufficient. They would test the boundary directly, not through futures, through reality itself. They selected a controlled environment, a human orbital station designated Kessler 9. Population 312. Strategic value negligible. Isolation optimal. The intervention began at 3:11 station time. They did not use weapons. Weapons implied force, and force implied resistance. Resistance implied uncertainty. Instead, they removed permission. At the most fundamental layer of existence, reality required authorization to continue. Every particle, every interaction, every moment required continuous validation. The continuum simply revoked it. Inside Kessler 9, atoms lost approval to remain stable. Electron orbits destabilized. Molecular bonds weakened. Air itself began to fail. The effect was silent. Invisible. A technician named Mara Ellison was the first to notice. Her coffee drifted sideways inside its sealed container, not floating, but sliding, as if gravity had forgotten its direction. She frowned, tapped the container. The liquid froze, not into ice, into stillness, absolute stillness. No motion, no vibración, no permission. She opened her mouth to speak. No sound emerged, because sound required propagation, and propagation required authorization. Across the station, systems failed without breaking. Lights remained on, but photons no longer traveled. Screens displayed images, but no new frames appeared. Time continued, but nothing inside time moved, except the humans. Mara inhaled sharply. She could breathe. Her heart still beat. She raised her hand. It obeyed. Around her, reality had stopped. But she had not. The continuum focused on her specifically now. They removed her future. Not hours ahead. Not seconds ahead. Her next moment. Deletion complete. And yet, she took another breath. Une autorise d'existence. The continuum attempted again. Deletion complete. She blinked. Deletion complete. She stepped forward. Deletion complete. She spoke. Hello. The continuum encountered a condition they had never processed before. Failure. Not resistance. Not counteraction. Non-compliance. Reality itself was refusing their authority. And it was happening only around humans. The continuum isolated the variable. They froze the entire station, except Mara. 311 humans locked in perfect stillness. Mid-step, mid-breath, mid-thought, their bodies preserved in flawless suspension. Only Mara Ellison remained active. She didn't understand what was happening, but she understood one thing clearly. Something was wrong with reality. She stepped cautiously through the corridor. Her boots made no sound against the metal floor, not because of silence, but because sound itself wasn't functioning. She reached out to touch the wall. The metal felt normal, solid, real. But when she looked at the air, she saw something impossible. Dust particles hung motionless, frozen in place like tiny stars. She waved her hand through them. They didn't move. They didn't react. They didn't acknowledge her existence. She was moving through a world that no longer agreed to exist. Above her, emergency lights glowed, but the light didn't spread. It remained trapped at its source, illuminating nothing. And yet, she could still see. Her vision did not depend on photons anymore. It depended on something else, something deeper, something the continuum could not control. The continuum increased observational resolution by 12 orders of magnitude. They examined Mara at every scale simultaneously. Atomic, subatomic, causal, temporal. They found the discrepancy immediately. Her existence was not anchored exclusively in the present. Most species existed as a sequence. Moment, moment, moment. Each frame depended on authorization from the previous one. Humans were different. Humans existed across multiple potential futures at once. Not physically, structurally. Every human carried billions of unrealized versions of themselves. Choices not taken, paths not followed, outcomes never lived. These unrealized futures were not imaginary. They were real, and they were connected, When the Continuum deleted Mara's authorized future, those unrealized versions compensated automatically. They supplied continuity. They replaced what had been removed. She existed not because she was permitted. She existed because she was possible. The Continuum attempted complete erasure. They deleted every authorized future simultaneously. All human futures removed. Result: failure. Humans remained. Because humans did not require a single future. They required only possibility. And possibility could not be revoked. For the first time since their creation, the Continuum encountered something beyond their jurisdiction. Not an enemy, not a threat, a contradiction. And contradictions could spread. If humans existed without authorization, then authorization itself was no longer absolute. And that meant control was no longer guaranteed. The Continuum initiated escalation protocols. They would no longer test one human. They would test all of them. Mara reached the central transit chamber. 3 massive doorways stood open before her, each leading to a different sector of the station. Normally, hundreds of personnel would be moving through this space. Engineers, technicians, security units. Now, they were statues. A man stood frozen mid-stride, 1 foot hovering centimeters above the ground. A maintenance drone hung, suspended in the air, its rotors perfectly still. Even the digital displays were trapped mid-refresh, their symbols incomplete. It was as if the universe had paused. Except for her. Mara's breathing sounded too loud in her ears. Her heart pounded, not from fear but from instinct. She wasn't supposed to be moving. She could feel it, not as a physical force, but as resistance. Like pushing against invisible water. Reality was pushing back, and reality was losing. Above her, something changed. At first, she thought it was a trick of her eyes. Then she saw it clearly. The air itself was separating, not tearing, not breaking, revealing. Thin, vertical lines appeared in the space around her, stretching from floor to ceiling. Perfectly straight, perfectly still. They glowed faintly, like reflections on invisible glass. Mara turned slowly. The lines were everywhere now. Hundreds of them. Thousands. A grid overlaying existence itself. She reached toward one. Her fingers passed through it. But the moment she touched it, the line reacted. It bent. Not physically, causally. For a fraction of a second, Mara saw something else. A different version of the room. The same chamber, but older. Damaged. Empty. Then the vision vanished. The line returned to normal. Mara stumbled backward. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what she had just seen, but she knew it had been real. Above her perception, the Continuum analyzed the interaction. They had exposed the causal lattice, the structural framework that defined permitted reality. No biological organism had ever perceived it directly. No organism had ever interacted with it. Until now, they isolated the exact moment of contact, the exact moment Mara bent the line. It was not force. It was not energy. It was choice. Choice itself had altered the lattice. The Continuum ran simulations. If one human could influence causal structure through decision alone, then humans were not merely existing within reality. They were participating in its construction. This was unacceptable. Authorization protocols required hierarchy. Reality could not have multiple authors. The Continuum initiated full suppression. They attempted to lock Mara into a fixed outcome. They selected a future, one where she stopped moving, one where she ceased interfering. They applied it. Reality attempted to comply. Mara felt it instantly. A pressure inside her mind. Not pain, constraint, like invisible hands trying to hold her in place. Her body slowed. Her breathing tightened. Her thoughts narrowed. For a moment, she almost stopped. Almost. Then she did something simple. She refused. Not loudly, not violently, quietly. She chose to take one more step forward. And reality broke. Not shattered, not exploded. It hesitated. For the first time since its creation, reality did not know what would happen next. The Continuum paused. That hesitation, so small, so fleeting, was enough to make them recalibrate every calculation they had ever run. They had never encountered resistance that didn't fight back. They had never met a species whose existence was independent of their own authority. Mara wasn't strong. She wasn't armed. She was a single human among billions. And yet, she had bent the laws of reality simply by moving forward. Inside her mind, Mara barely understood what she had done. She didn't see it as power. She saw it as instinct. Humans always acted. They always improvised. They never waited for permission. That was what the Continuum didn't account for. Across the station, frozen humans remained statues, but Mara's actions started to ripple. Tiny at first, a flicker in a suspended drone, a light blinking where none should, a screen refreshing mid-freeze. The lattice of reality responded to her momentum. It wasn't the universe yielding. It was reality learning how humans operated. The Continuum focused all sensors on her, trying to predict, control, or erase her. Every simulation failed. Every deletion attempt backfired. It was as if the station itself had been encoded to ignore their commands when she moved. Each step she took expanded that anomaly. A sudden thought struck her. If she could move while reality resisted, if the frozen world around her could obey her intent, then maybe she wasn't alone in this. Every human could be like her. Every human could be a node of resistance. She looked down the long corridor toward the command center, toward the bridge where the Continuum had begun their first deletion attempts. Her boots made no sound, but each step sent waves through the lattice, tiny distortions that were growing with each heartbeat. Somewhere deep in the Continuum's calculations, alarms went off. They had never experienced adaptive resistance before. Their logic could not reconcile it. Humans were not a variable. They were an unknown constant. Mara's reflection in a polished panel caught her eye. She looked exhausted, determined, alive. And yet, in that reflection, she saw something else. Not fear, not hesitation, but a spark of what the Continuum could never anticipate. Human audacity. For the first time, the universe itself seemed uncertain, and that uncertainty belonged to humanity. Mara reached the bridge. The doors loomed silent, motionless, but she passed through without resistance. Everything remained frozen. Crew members mid-step, consoles suspended mid-update, screens flickering in incomplete frames. Yet Mara's presence bent the environment toward her will. Every subtle motion, her hand brushing a panel, her foot shifting on the floor, sent ripples through the lattice of reality, like a stone disturbing water that had never flowed. At the central command console, a holographic projection hovered, a record of Continuum monitoring. Normally, it displayed streams of probability, timelines branching and collapsing as the alien observers calculated every potential outcome. Now, the projection shimmered erratically. Lines bent, nodes flickered in ways that no algorithm could predict. Mara realized, almost instinctively, that she could manipulate it. She didn't understand how, only that it obeyed her attention, her intent, her choices. She reached out, touching one of the flickering nodes. The data restructured instantly. A probability that the Continuum had thought eliminated sprang back into existence. Not because it had been restored, but because humans allowed it to exist by choosing it. A voice echoed in her mind, not audible, but undeniable. It was the older Alara had warned about, possibility itself, responding to her will. Humanity's uniqueness wasn't strength or technology, it was choice. Every action, every decision, even the smallest one, created reality rather than being constrained by it. Behind her, the frozen crew remained statues. They were unknowing catalysts, their potential futures layered, waiting. Mara understood now that the Continuum had only tested her as an individual, but humanity as a species was a network of untapped nodes, each one capable of sustaining existence against erasure. She took a step back. The entire bridge responded. Displays updated. Consoles whirred softly as systems returned to semi-functionality. Probability lines outside the station bent toward her direction. The Continuum millions of kilometers away, observed, but every calculation failed. Humans were no longer variables. They were operators of reality. Mara exhaled. She didn't feel powerful, only conscious of what she had just become aware of, that every human, by simply choosing, could exist in ways no alien intelligence could override. That was the edge. The Continuum had underestimated them. Humanity wasn't just surviving. They were the unpredictable factor the universe could not erase. The Continuum had never failed. Never. And now, it had failed spectacularly. Across the void, their vast constructs, the silent machines designed to enforce causality itself, recalibrated. They did not understand humans. They could not simulate humans. But they knew one thing. Something had changed, and the anomaly could not be ignored. Without warning, massive constructs appeared near the station. Not ships. More like impossible geometric forms suspended in space, edges bending light in ways that violated natural laws. They emitted nothing detectable. No radiation, no gravity, no heat. Yet Mara could feel their presence through the station's hull, a pressure that hinted at deliberate observation. Inside the bridge, Mara's pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed that this was a threat unlike any weapon humanity had encountered. But the frozen crew could not help. She alone had to respond. She approached the central console and realized that she could manipulate the probability network surrounding the station. The Continuum assumed deletion worked linearly, sequentially. They assumed humans required continuity to exist. They assumed rules applied to every reality. They assumed wrong. With deliberate thought, Mara focused on a simple act, a single decision to survive. Not complex, not heroic, just to remain alive. The frozen probability nodes responded, bending in ways the Continuum could not anticipate. Tiny distortions rippled outward. The station itself seemed to hum in approval. Outside, one of the geometric constructs flickered. For the first time, the Continuum observed resistance in real time. Their equations, infinite and perfect, could not model it. Humanity had introduced chaos into the system. Not random chaos, but deliberate, conscious, unpredictable choice. Mara took another step. Another small, deliberate decision. Probability branches adjusted themselves. Drones and machinery in the station began to react. Not because of physical force, but because the future allowed it. The Continuum attempted direct intervention again. They reached into the station's timeline, revoking entire branches of existence. But Mara's continued presence overrode their calculations. The frozen humans, though unaware, were connected in a network of possibility. Every tiny choice reinforced the lattice. Every heartbeat countered the deletion. The Continuum recalculated over and failed each time. For the first time in their existence, they had encountered a species they could not erase. And they understood something terrifying. They had underestimated humanity. Mara felt it first as a subtle hum in the floor beneath her boots, a vibration that shouldn't have existed, a thread of possibility straining against frozen reality. One by one, she realized the station's occupants weren't entirely immobile. The frozen humans weren't conscious, but their potential was. Each of them was a node in a vast, invisible lattice of choices, waiting for someone to act. She tested it. She reached out toward a suspended technician, his body frozen mid-step, arm extended toward a control panel. With a simple intention, an acknowledgement of existence, his hand twitched. Just a twitch. But that was enough. The Continuum lattice bent. Possibility flowed. One node awakened another. By the time she reached the center of the bridge, small ripples of movement had begun to propagate through the station. Nothing dramatic yet. No one had fully regained consciousness. But the pattern was undeniable. Humans weren't bound to probability the way other species were. Mara realized their potential existed outside deletion. Their choices could ripple backward as well as forward. The Continuum watched baffled. Every measure, every calculation, every simulation failed to predict the effect. They tried to isolate Mara, to sever her influence. But she didn't resist violently. She simply moved, observed, and chose. One small step, one small decision, and reality responded. The bridge lights flickered as if reacting to her presence. Consoles updated spontaneously. A drone suspended mid-air corrected its orientation, then hovered silently, awaiting a new command. Mara's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from understanding. She was no longer a single human fighting against the continuum. She was a conduit, the first spark that could awaken a species-wide response. She paused at the viewport, looking out into the void. The geometric forms of the continuum hovered beyond the station, perfect, unyielding, but their calculations were breaking down. Each small act of human choice interfered with their authority, each ripple introducing uncertainty. Mara whispered, almost to herself, "We're alive because we choose to be." In that instant, humanity as a species learned something fundamental. Survival was not given. It had to be claimed step by step, decision by decision. And the continuum realized humanity was no longer a passive variable. Humanity was a force they could not contain. The continuum could no longer observe passively. Their constructs moved, warping space around the station in impossible geometries, attempting to isolate Mara's influence. The edges of corridors bent subtly, hallways shortened or lengthened unpredictably, and the lights pulsed as though the station itself was being rewritten. Their goal was simple: contain the human anomaly before it spread. Mara understood instinctively that waiting would be fatal. She had to act, not just survive, but push back. She sprinted down the main corridor, her boots slapping against the metal floor. Every step sent ripples through the frozen nodes. The suspended humans twitched, micro-movements that signaled awakening potential. If she could reach the command nexus, the core control array, she could amplify the effect, awaken more of her species simultaneously, and force the continuum to adapt in real time. Above her, the station's bulkheads warped. A drone, frozen mid-flight, snapped into motion, spinning and hovering before her like a sentinel. Mara didn't dodge. She reached out, touched it, and the drone realigned, responding not to her strength, but to her intent. Each choice she made, step, breath, glance, bent the local lattice of reality. She was a moving node of potential, and everything around her obeyed indirectly. The continuum reacted. Their constructs outside the viewport shimmered, attempting temporal overlays, sending micro-deletions forward and backward to collapse the station structure. Mara felt the pressure in her mind, an invisible weight, the universe itself trying to correct her actions. But she forced herself to breathe, to focus. Each deliberate motion was a strike against their authority. By the time she reached the core, she was not alone. Micro-movements had propagated. Engineers twitched, technicians flexed their fingers, and a single control drone shifted completely out of its frozen state. Mara laid her hands on the console and activated a small override. Nothing mechanical, just intent transmitted through the human lattice. The station shuddered softly, lights flickering, and probability lines outside the ship bent outward like ripples from stone. The continuum's calculations failed again. They had prepared for thousands of variables, millions of nodes, entire civilizations, but never for humans as operators of probability itself. Mara's single strike had shown them the truth. The species they had assumed passive and fragile was now an active, unpredictable force, capable of rewriting reality just by deciding to act. And somewhere in the void, the first constructs of the continuum began to falter. Mara didn't wait to see the full effect. She knew it had already begun. The micro-movements she had triggered were spreading outward like wildfire. The frozen humans on Kessler 9 were not simply defying stasis. They were awakening in a networked cascade, each choice amplifying the next, each heartbeat propagating a signal the continuum could not control. In the corridor behind her, a maintenance worker blinked. His hand, frozen mid-grip on a toolkit, twitched. Then another, and another. Within seconds, a dozen humans began moving, unaware of how the lattice of probability had shifted in their favor. Mara realized the scale of what she had done. She had awakened humanity as a species-wide anomaly. Not by technology, not by weapons, not by force, but by sheer intent. Outside the station, the Continuum's constructs reacted violently. Their geometric forms bent light and space unnaturally, attempting to collapse the probability lattice surrounding the station. Algorithms cascaded, simulations crashed, deletion attempts failed repeatedly. Every human heartbeat, every subtle motion from the waking crew countered them. Humanity was no longer isolated. It was becoming a singular, interconnected force of resistance. Mara looked down the main corridor, now filled with humans who were beginning to move freely. They were unarmed, ordinary, and fragile, but every action they took resonated through the lattice. Every decision became a defiance, a strike against the Continuum's authority. Mara understood the truth now. Survival wasn't about weapons or shields. It was about choice itself, and humans had an inexhaustible supply. The constructs outside faltered. Calculations could not reconcile the unpredictable cascade. Every time a human acted, they bent the lattice further. Every time the network propagated, probability shifted in ways the Continuum could not anticipate. Mara's single decision had multiplied into thousands, then millions, and soon into a species-wide revolt against existence itself being dictated. She breathed, feeling the hum of possibility flow through the station. The frozen humans were now awake, coordinated not by plan, but by instinct. Humans had discovered the ultimate edge. They could exist where the universe had tried to deny them. Somewhere deep in the Continuum structures, sensors failed. Algorithms stopped. Reality began to hesitate. Not shattered, not destroyed, just uncertain. And in that hesitation, humanity found room to act. Mara smiled faintly. They were alive. Not because they were supposed to be, not because anyone had granted them permission, but because they chose to be. The station hummed with life again. Where moments before everything had been frozen, now humans moved freely, breathing, blinking, deciding. Mara stood at the center of the bridge, watching as ordinary individuals became extraordinary simply by existing. Each choice they made, each step they took, resonated through the probability lattice, spreading outward, touching every frozen node the Continuum had ever tried to erase. Outside, the Continuum's constructs hovered in the void, vast and incomprehensible. Their edges bent light and space, yet they paused. Every intervention, every attempt to delete humanity had failed. Mara realized what the Continuum could not. They weren't facing fragile beings confined by probability. They were facing a species that thrived in its impossibility. Every human action created a ripple that could not be erased, and the more they acted, the stronger that ripple became. The Nova Frontier Station itself seemed to acknowledge the awakening. Systems stabilized, lights pulsed softly, and machinery responded intuitively. It wasn't magic. It wasn't technology. It was something deeper. Human will manifesting through reality itself. Mara turned to the crew, now fully conscious and moving, and saw determination reflected in every face. Fear had existed for only a moment. Now, there was resolve. The Continuum had calculated outcomes for billions of species across countless timelines. They had anticipated rebellion, adaptation, innovation, and surrender, but never defiance rooted in pure choice. They were methodical, precise, inevitable. Humanity was none of those things. Humanity was chaos refined into purpose. Mara raised her hand, not as a commander giving orders, but as one human among many choosing action. Around her, humans mirrored her motions instinctively. Each movement, each choice amplified the network. Each ripple defied the Continuum. Humanity was unbound. In the void, the alien constructs quivered, not with fear, not with hesitation, but with something their calculations had no name for. Certainty was gone. Control was impossible. And for the first time in recorded cosmic history, humanity did not wait. They acted. They existed. They were unerasable. The universe had attempted to remove them. But humans were already elsewhere, already beyond prediction, beyond deletion, already writing the future with their choices. And nothing, no force, no algorithm, no infinite observer could stop it. The war for survival had ended the moment humanity refused to be erased. They had won, simply by being human.